Hi, friends, and welcome to the Death with Dignity podcast, episode 2. My name is Andrew Flack, and I'll be your host. We're also here with co-producer Hazban, and a special guest joins us, Suzy Flack, who happens to be my mother. The purpose of this episode is to share my experiences as a cancer patient and also to gain input from a mother's perspective as to how these cancer stints have impacted her and our family. Before we really get started, I'd like to take a moment to directly thank my mom for joining us and recording this episode with us. It took a tremendous amount of courage. Suzy carried this episode, and I am extremely proud of her for stepping up and sharing some of her more challenging and traumatic experiences as a mother. Thank you, Mom, for taking the risk and being vulnerable. Next, I'd like to warn our listeners that there is a long pause or moment of silence around the 40-minute mark. No, your podcast is not broken. At that time, I was overwhelmed with emotion based on the topic of discussion and simply needed a moment to take a deep breath and compose myself. Ultimately, I feel we've developed a powerful episode, very raw and very real, while discussing a challenging topic. If anything, I hope this provides us an opportunity to develop empathy for each other, compassion, and connect us together as people, not just host and listener of a podcast. We thank you for your support, we thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the episode. Yes, good, very good. All right, well, we are live, everybody, in the Nevada house. And of course, when you hear this, it will not technically be live because this is a podcast. But that's all right. We will be researching today the topic of aid in dying or death with dignity. My name is Andrew Flack. I am a resident of Oceanside, California. I'm also a stage 4 cancer patient and a patient who has the option to use the medication involved with death with dignity. So we decided to essentially develop a little podcast here regarding the death with dignity topic, hoping to investigate the physical components, social, emotional, and spiritual components to this whole process. We're here today to review kind of the history of myself, my experiences with cancer, because there have been multiple experiences, and also where I'm at, prognosis, and what things might look like as things progress. We're also here with my mother, Suzy Flack. We thought it'd be great to have her on to give us a little perspective of what she is dealing with as a mother of, having a child who has a terminal disease, and also, again, investigating some of the components to this process of death with dignity. Along with us as well, my roommate Hazban, who has been a producer and developer of this podcast, helped put this all together, so appreciate that. Both of you guys say hello. Feel free to jump in whenever.
Hi to anybody that's listening. This is actually the first episode we're recording, so cut us some slack. It's going to get better and better as it goes forward.
Yes, well said.
And I'm Suzy, the mother. Hello to all who are listening. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so thank you for saying that, Hazban, as well. First attempt here recording, so as mentioned, hopefully things will get better as we go. It should be a fun experience overall, getting some of these ideas down. I think therapeutic, cathartic in a way, and hopefully helpful for those who are listening. This is a topic that I think needs more discussion. It's an option that I feel should be available to many people who are living with a terminal illness, but we'll have plenty of time to talk about that. And as mentioned today, we'll take time to kind of talk about the history of death with dignity and also the history of my experience with cancer and the death with dignity process. But to start, let's see. We gotta turn back the clock here. Many years ago, when I was 4 years old, I had been diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer called Wilms tumor. This is a kidney cancer that's often found in children. Usually it's a pretty manageable disease, but by the time we had found it, it had spread to the lungs, so it was quite advanced. We had just moved to England at the time. I don't have a very full, I only have a few memories of this whole experience. They're pretty vivid memories for the most part, but certainly have the scars to prove it as well. And I thought it'd be good to have someone here to explain what that experience was like with more of an understanding, more memories. So, Mom, we'll send it over your way and let you grab the mic and just kind of share with us a couple questions for you. So we'll just kind of chit chat as we go. But one of the questions, maybe to start, is how did you find out when I was first diagnosed? Did you notice any physical signs, or what was it that led to you being suspicious of something being wrong?
Of course, I can remember it as if it were yesterday. I was giving you a bath and drying you off, and I noticed one of your testicles was quite enlarged. And since you were my only boy with 3 sisters, I didn't have a lot of experience, so I called a friend of mine who was an American woman living in the UK as well, and she was a nurse, and suggested I get you right into the doctor, which I did. And the doctor took a look at you, and he manipulated your abdominal area, and he must have known right away something very serious was wrong, because he sent me with a sealed envelope onto the hospital. To this day, I don't understand why I never opened that envelope, because it was so unlike me. But I took you to the hospital, and within a few hours, they had told me that they had found a considerably large mass, and that when a mass is found in children, typically it is cancerous. So by that time, everything was in, it seemed like, slow motion, and you ended up being admitted to the hospital, and they literally kept you there and started treatments, transferred you to a children's hospital and started treatments within days. And at the time, since the cancer had spread, your chances of surviving the treatments were given to us as a 50% chance of even surviving the treatments. So it was a pretty bleak prognosis, and obviously very difficult, especially compounded by the fact that we were in a foreign country. My first response was wanting to get back on a plane that day and take you back to the States. And the doctors cautioned us not to do that, that you probably wouldn't have survived the trip. So we began treatments there. And within 6 months, we went back to the States to have you analyzed there. And the doctor at Children's Memorial in Chicago actually told us to get back on a plane, because at that point, you were in the best place for your type of cancer. And they do things differently there in terms of the protocol. And they're able to look more at an individual basis for each case. So that worked to your advantage. Another thing, because you mentioned the tumors had metastasized into your lungs, and over in the UK, they were able to radiate your lungs, which in the States, they probably would have not done that. And I believe to this day, probably saved your life, and was one of the factors that allowed you to remain healthy for as long as you did.
Yes, obviously heavy stuff. What was the family reaction like? And as you mentioned, we had just moved to the UK, so you guys probably didn't have many friends. I know Nana and Papa came over for a stint. Overall family reaction, and the girls, and you and Dad, and
Right.
how you manage that.
I think the overall family reaction, it was just everyone was in shock initially. At the time, your siblings were in second grade, kindergarten, and then you had a sister who was 3. And so it was very difficult finding childcare, those times when we immediately needed to pack up and rush to the hospital. And sometimes we'd be there for 3 weeks at a time. You attended an American community school, which there was a very strong network of support that I found through them. And when you're faced with that situation, you do things that you never anticipate you would do. For example, Kelly, the youngest sister, went to stay with strangers who I had never met. But they were vouched through another American friend, and you just have to trust that things will work out. And she was there for 2 weeks without me seeing her during those initial stages, and the other 2 girls went to stay with friends. So that was very difficult. I have always thought that the universe puts people in your path when you need them the most, and this experience even now has proven no different. Eventually, we decided to obtain an au pair to live with us, and she just fell into our lap and ended up being a part of our family and remained with us long after you had recovered from that bout of cancer. And she was a lifesaver.
Yes, Sally was a gem, Australian, a beauty, and we're lucky to still hear from her. Kelly does a good job connecting with her via social media, so that's excellent. Another perk to the social media world. Tell us about how the cancer treatments progressed. After you came back and decided to stay in the UK for treatments, I know that there were two major surgeries, obviously chemo and radiation. So what did those look like?
So initially, and this is what was different regarding the UK and the United States, initially your tumor was so large in your kidney that the protocol there was to shrink the tumor until it got to a size where it was more manageable to remove your kidney. They did remove your entire kidney. In America, they would have, because of protocol, right away taken that kidney out. So there was a little difference there. So you had probably 6 months of chemotherapy and then a surgery to remove the kidney, which by day 4, you were running around the hospital asking for a Big Mac. So that was not as intrusive as we had thought. Following that, then there was some more chemo, and eventually they had a surgeon who at the time went all over Europe removing tumors from people's lungs, and you had 43 tumors in your lungs that were the size of rice grains. And the man literally went through and touched the tissue and was able to remove these tumors. Unfortunately, when they biopsied the tumors, there were still live cancer cells, so you then went through a period of radiation. And that is something that was at the time questionable in the U.S. So again, I always tried to spin it that we were where we were meant to be at the time. One of the scariest times for us, or for myself and my husband, I believe, was after treatments were over. There was a period of time within the first 18 months that the doctors had told us that because of the stage of your cancer, within 18 months, there was a 90% chance your cancer would return. And if that were the case, there was virtually nothing else they could do. So those 18 months were a time period of waiting, which was almost more difficult than actually going through the treatments, because during that treatment period, I felt like we are actively doing something. When the treatments were over, it was just that waiting period, and it was on pins and needles. Anytime you had a sniffle, I thought the cancer was back. So once we reached that part, we kind of thought you were going to live a normal life. And when your cancer returned all those years later, it was a very big shock.
Yeah, certainly. What do you think were some of the, well, I guess one of the hardest parts for you was waiting, and I could see that would be extremely difficult. When thinking of the experiences in the UK versus what we're doing now here in the US, do you notice any major differences between whether it's the care or the process?
Well, the UK we went through the national health system there. They have a national health system. They also have private insurance. But what we were told is your teams, the best teams work for the NHS, the National Health System. So there it was a bit different in terms of the treatments were all, they were all, I don't know how to say it. They were all scheduled for you. Everything followed the same routine.
Kind of verified, or a standard care plan, or
yes.
plan of care, I should say.
And we really didn't deviate from that. The doctors were phenomenal. The, staff, the way they worked with children was amazing. And I felt that we really did receive phenomenal care there.
That's great.
Here, now it's more on you, so I can't really respond because you're in charge of making all the decisions now, and setting everything up.
Right. Do you have any specific memories that make you think of the first experience? For example, for me, I think I mentioned earlier that I don't have a ton of memories. A couple. Playing the Game Boy, for sure. The original Game Boy at that. I think it was Super Mario World. Big Macs in the hospital. A little bit of the volleyball hitting as well, or like the beach ball, I should say. And then also watching Captain Planet. I remember watching that show quite a bit, but those are just couple random memories. Do you have anything specific that stands out to you that you want to share or reflect on?
In the UK, you were on wards, so you had a lot of, you got to know a lot of the parents, the children. There was that parental support amongst each other, helping with each other's children, whether it be watching the kids play Mario for a while so a parent could take a break. I do remember feeling that bond with people. You're all in the same situation, and you certainly have a lot to relate to. We were kind of an anomaly because we were the only Americans there. They always used to comment on the little American kid with his accent. We made it fun in spite of the trauma of everything, because we were alone. You were diagnosed in May, and most of the American community, once school gets out, leaves for the summer and goes back to the States. So that summer we were alone when you were deeply meshed in your first chemo, and I would have to take your siblings for your treatments, which lasted for a day. So we always tried to make fun of it, bring a picnic lunch, lots of things to do, and, try to make it as normal as we could.
How do you think the girls responded, or I guess understood everything going on?
I think it was very hard for them, and certainly our home was very chaotic because we never knew when you would become ill. And at times they would come home and we'd be gone and they would have to stay with family or well, with friends. We didn't have family out there prior to us getting the au pair. And it was very earth shattering to them. And they didn't really understand. We did have some family counseling that we went to as a group to try to talk about the disease. I tried very hard never to lie. They would ask, is he going to be okay? And I really tried to not lie and say, yes, he will. I tried to say the doctors are doing everything they can. We pray that he will be okay.
And how about some of the other family members who came over? Obviously, big help, I'm sure, at the time. Nana and Papa. I mean, both sides seemed like they came for a different stint.
Yes, they were very helpful. Both grandmas came. My mom, Nana Gettles, came initially when you were first diagnosed, and then Nana Flack came for months when you were due to have surgery, because your surgery kept being postponed because you would get an infection and then they couldn't do it for X amount of weeks afterwards. So in that respect, it was wonderful to have the family there. In another respect, when we came home here, which was about 6 months into your treatments, as I said, we came home to have you looked at Children's Memorial in Chicago. And at that point, we as a family, well, your father and I decided we were going back to the UK. And in some respects, I realized it was easier with just us, your dad and I being there making all those decisions, because for those few weeks we came home, we got so much input from family members of what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing that it was almost a little overwhelming. Yeah. And so then it gave us even more strength to get back on that plane and think, well, we're going to need to do this and we're going to need to do it in the UK and we're going to do it on our own, basically.
Sure, I can imagine. I mean, certainly some of that input can be helpful at times, and other times probably not as much or overwhelming as you mentioned. So after all that experience, we're here now. It's many years later, and obviously I've been diagnosed again. And what do you think, when you reflect on both situations, what has been more difficult thus far, playing the role as the mother of a child with cancer or playing the role as a mother of an adult with cancer?
Well, both diagnoses came as a shock, equally shocking in different respects. I think as a parent, you never think your child will encounter such a traumatic illness. And then to have it hit again, I think the second time for me, I can remember you called me and told me, yes, it is cancer. And I literally tried to keep myself together. And when we hung up, I literally fell to the floor and just was sobbing. I never anticipated a reoccurrence. I guess I was just being so optimistic that it never occurred to me that your cancer would return. So in that regard, the second diagnosis was harder for me. Probably the second time around is more difficult for me, simply because selfishly, as a child, your dad and I were able to make all the decisions, and I felt much more in control. Obviously, it's hard to see your young child sick, but it's not any easier seeing an adult child ill. The difference is that it was about the control for me. And this time around, it's a very hard thing to treat you as an adult and respect your need for privacy and the fact that you are handling this situation and doing a phenomenal job of it. But if I could, I would have moved in next door and gone to every doctor's appointment with you and been there for every question to hear it, every answer firsthand. And I know I cannot do that. Plus, I am in Chicago. You're out here in California, so the distance complicates things as well. So I definitely think for me it was easier to manage when you were a kid, in spite of all the chaos.
Sure. And then I suppose I'll maybe step in and just kind of share the experience thus far and really how I became sick again. And I think you probably vividly remember your visit with Papa. It was July of 17 and into August, but at that time I hadn't really been feeling that well. Was losing a lot of weight, very fatigued. I got to the point where I was getting sick after, I'd try to eat something. I'd end up usually vomiting shortly after. And I think you certainly noticed that when we had come out.
Yes, I did notice, and I anticipated that something was drastically wrong at that point. I think I had a gut feeling this is not good. Because in spite of, even when you were going through treatments as a child, you have always been very healthy. So when I saw the pain you were in, and I was very suspicious that something was wrong.
Yeah. Later that summer, or at the beginning of the fall, is when the doctors did a colonoscopy, and they did find a large mass during that scope. And at that point, I think I knew something was also seriously wrong. I did have blood in my stool as well at that point, so a lot of bad signs, obviously. I was hoping at that point, really, it was maybe like a stomach ulcer, something, causing difficulties. Wasn't really exactly sure if it'd be cancer. I think there was a part of me that knew it probably was, but that part was probably in denial as well. So we did the scope. They found a large mass. I remember I was at the bar at HQ that night and having a couple beverages. That was also a thing. I partied my face off that summer, so I wondered if maybe some of this was, burning the wick at both ends, if you will. In the body, just being a little tired. But at the bar having a beer, Dr. Masters was her name. This is when I was with Kaiser, would do colonoscopies and basically just called me, had gotten the biopsy back, confirmed that it was cancerous. She had mentioned when she had did the scope initially that the mass was too large for her to remove, so it would need to be removed surgically. So going into the biopsy news, I knew that there would be at least a surgery. They confirmed it was cancer, and obviously I shared the news with Mom and Dad and the rest of the family. And from there, things started moving pretty quick. I remember it was 1 month exactly from the diagnosis to when I started chemo and radiation. I started chemo as an oral pill. I would take it twice a day, and the radiation was once a day for 6 weeks, 5 days a week. So I was still working at the time as a special ed teacher in San Marcos and would go to work and then cruise down to UCSD. Treatments, they get you in and out pretty quick. It's like a 20-minute process usually. And then usually sat in a few hours of Southern California traffic on my way back to Oceanside. At this point, I'm immune to the traffic. It just does nothing to me. But from there, they were able to shrink the tumor pretty significantly. And the plan after that was to wait 6 weeks and do a surgery. And then after a recovery from the surgery, they would do more chemotherapy to make sure everything finished up and cleared out in terms of the cancer. We did the first surgery successfully. Margins looked good, and the margins are what they consider healthy tissue. So they remove the tumor and all the bad disease, as well as some of the healthy tissue surrounding it, just to make sure they get all of the cells out. And this was removing part of my colorectal intestine. So they did that, and the recovery, well, I remember waking up from the surgery, and it felt like I was run over by a train. It was incredible. Just the pain. What they do, pain everywhere, shoulders, neck. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And my surgeon explained that they'll often pump your stomach cavity full of air so that they get more room to work with, and the air settles in your body and it moves up your body as it like essentially leaves or disperses. So how I kind of envisioned it was like, I guess, causing inflammation in the shoulders and all of that. But yeah, that was quite the experience. The other surgeries are much easier. I'm not sure why that one was so hard. But we had the recovery. The recovery was tough too. I had lots of tubes hanging off, all that stuff, a lot of wound management. Was able to get through that. And then 6 weeks later, we started chemotherapy called FOLFOX. And FOLFOX, this is kind of part of the gold standard of the approach to stage 3 colorectal, which is what I was initially diagnosed with. The FOLFOX regime was heavy. I had a good feeling going into it because I had responded pretty well to all these other treatments. And I was not prepared for this one. So the routine is I would go in on Thursdays. It was every other week for 8 cycles. So 4 months, I think, basically. And let's see, you'd go in, they'd start you on the chemotherapy in the Kaiser facility. As mentioned, I was with Kaiser at this time. And I would be there for about 2 hours, and then they would hook you up with a chemotherapy pump, and it was essentially a gravity-operated pump. It didn't need any batteries or anything. It would just slowly drip the rest of the medication into your body through my PICC line, and the pump would be active for 46 hours. So you do the 2 hours at Kaiser, followed up by 46 hours at home, which is nice. At least you get to go home. You don't have to hang around a hospital for 2 days and receive the treatments. And it's heavy. The first time that I had the FOLFOX treatments, I was so sick. And I thought, man, there is no way I'll be able to do this every 2 weeks because it was tough. Z was a big help at that time. He was certainly the primary caretaker. Hasbam, this was well before he moved in. The next few treatments for the FOLFOX got a lot easier because I had told my doctor, how heavy it was, and he prescribed some medications to help combat the nausea and the vomiting. And those medications were extremely heavy as well. How I kind of, I guess, describe it, it's almost like you were put into the zombie state on the medication, where you were in the state of like numbness. Your body wouldn't feel much, and cognitively, you're aware of what's going on around you, but it's just a very different way of processing things. Very slow. It almost slows down time. It feels like when you're on these meds. So that was always a very weird sensation as well, because you do that for a whole weekend and it's almost like time is non-existent in a way. Another way I describe it is it's like in the movies where the main character is walking around and they're walking at like a normal pace, but then everybody else is time lapsed, fast forward, super speed.
Yeah. Like everyone's moving really fast.
Exactly, right. That's kind of how it seemed like. Yeah, that's how I would spend my weekend basically. But it's either that or being extremely sick for, 12, 20 hours. And the drugs were pretty fun if you look at it the right way. So I will say, though, it often reminded me of some of the students I teach because some of my students are on very heavy medications. And the medications that I was on during those treatment weekends are actually used to treat people with mental health disorders, primarily schizophrenia. So for whatever reason, when you're on these medications, your body just, I guess, is able to kind of absorb some of those bad side effects from the treatments. But it reminded me of my students, or made me think of them, because I would think that these kids would be spending probably their whole life on these things.
That is our GoPro. That is our GoPro going off. Does that mean it's done?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the battery ran out, but that's
cool.
okay. We got a good start there. Let's see, I'm trying to think of where we left off here.
You were describing the medication.
Yeah, just
for the first surgery,
right,
or after the first surgery.
Right, and just learning and seeing that the primary use is for people with mental health disorders. I just found that fascinating. Thanks.
People can hear the sound. It might be a lighter being lit.
For sure, and certain greens being smoked, baby. Yeehaw. So I'll try to speed up with some of these other details, because I would like to try to get to we'll get to the death with dignity piece too, and how that all came into play. But basically, yeah, so I did those treatments for 4 months. Everything looked great. The surgery had gone well. I responded really well to the treatments. Around October, I was supposed to have my final surgery to reconnect some plumbing, is how I put it. And leading up to that, again, things looked good. We did a CT scan, we did a blood work, everything came back normal and looked fine. And the surgery was a green light. My dad came out for that surgery. The plan was for him to come hang out, help me for the first week, and then my mom was going to come out the second week. And yeah, I remember we went in, business as usual. Dr. K was running behind at the time. I think I was the second on the list for the day. And he finally came in. He said, all right, let's do it. Went into the room, said bye to Dad, was wheeled back or whatever. Put me under, woke back up. And when I woke up, everything was the same. I didn't feel any pain. I still had my same physical setup with my ostomy and such. And I remember thinking, this isn't right.
I know you didn't touch on it much, but I might have been on mute, but I know you didn't touch on it much, but you had a bag after the first surgery.
Right. And that's what the surgery was for. We were going in to remove that.
So yeah, you would go
reconnect everything. Just, yeah, essentially, kind of put the body back to how it was. And when the doc put me under, he always starts with a physical exam. And he could feel that something wasn't right. And they basically found another mass. And so this was only 3 months after completing the treatments. So it's pretty shocking that the disease had come back that quickly. And when I woke up, again, I mentioned everything was the same as when I had gone under. So I knew that something wasn't quite right. And I remember flagging down the nurse, and she was pretty standoffish. And then Steve came back, and I knew right away that something wasn't right. And he basically said that the cancer had come back. So, very shocking. And I think certainly, at least for me, the relapse was much more devastating than the initial diagnosis. I think part of the reason that I feel that way is because you put in all that work. You put in a lot of time to try and get healthy. And obviously, within a matter of months, you're getting the complete opposite news of what you expected. So that was really hard. Obviously, it still is really hard. There are some days where yeah, and maybe mom, you feel this way too, but there are some days where I'll just be driving and you just think, is this even real?
Yeah, I certainly feel like that. Like some days it's right in front of my face that my son is going to die before I am. And that is such an unnatural circle of life that yes, many days I can block it out and go about my business, and then all of a sudden it takes over and you realize the reality you're in. And it's certainly one you never anticipated being in, and one you would do anything to get out of.
Yep. The relapse was hard. Dr. K, he told my old man, well, first of all, my old man had relayed to me, Dr. K was pretty rattled after the failed attempt. I don't think anybody anticipated it. And he said to Steve, usually we look for the patient to be, 3 years out before we kind of anticipate a relapse. And this was 3 months. So to him, it meant that the disease was extremely aggressive and likely pretty rare in its form, because it obviously didn't really respond to treatments and it had come back, as mentioned, within 3 months. So when that happened, we knew things were, pretty serious. And around that time, that was at the end of October. So I was in the position actually where, for my work, it was, quote, open enrollment, in which we were able to change our insurance companies. And I think we knew Kaiser. They had done a good job managing things initially, but this was probably something we needed a lot more help with. And we started to explore a lot of other options, different universities, getting recommendations from different doctors at Kaiser's. A lot of them came back with the same people at UCSD or University of California, San Diego. Was highly recommended, and then just through my own research as well. And by research, I of course mean Googling. But yes, they were always the top of the list. So after the relapse, the doctors did want to do something. They didn't want me just sitting there, so we ended up doing another course of radiation and chemotherapy. It was a repeat of the first approach from the previous December. So all this fell in line within a year, basically. So after the first diagnosis, about a year later, or in December, I should say, so a little longer than a year, we had started treatments again. Only this time I was doing radiation 2 times a day for 3 weeks. So that was hard because although I wasn't working at the time, I would wake up usually around 5 or 6 and drive to UCSD for a treatment at 6:37, whatever time it would be. And then we would have to wait 6 hours in between. So I would go back later that afternoon, usually 2 or 3. And again, as mentioned earlier, I am immune to traffic at that point. So it was a little easier. Just get some good tunes going. And maybe smoke a bowl on the way back. Who knows? But we did the treatments, and the plan was to switch care to UCSD, which we did at the beginning of the year in January. This would be January of 2019 now. And I started meeting with surgeons from UCSD. Dr. Emma Morthy was my primary surgeon, still is. And the plan was for her to go in and remove the mass that was there. And again, wait another 6 weeks. And then they would, fix me up again and remove the bag. And I'd go back to more chemotherapy treatments. And they were very confident they'd get us out. We did the radiation and the chemo. We even did a pre-scope before the surgery, and they biopsied the mass, and it actually changed its form to a less, I don't know the exact term of how the doctor put it, but it almost changed to like not necessarily a benign state, almost something like in between, but the cancer had shrunk significantly again. And then kind of changed for the better, in a sense, from the radiation and chemo. So we scheduled the surgery with Dr. R, and that was in February, and she went in, and again, more bad news, essentially. When she went in, she found the cancer had spread to the lymph nodes and to the bladder and to the tailbone as well. And she removed really as much as she could. And the plan from there was to get out of the surgery and probably start treatments again and go back to the drawing board. But I do believe, I know, Mom, you and Dad were here for that surgery, and I do believe she stopped in the middle to come out and talk with both of you and explain the situation. Do you recall that at all, or?
I do recall that, and the conversation was a very bleak one. At that time, we were obviously devastated again because of that news. And that was another breaking point where I just thought nothing is going as should, and I felt like everything that could possibly go wrong had gone wrong. So that was a very hard conversation with the doctor. And then when you woke up, it was equally as difficult explaining the situation to you.
Yeah, I think that part was more denial for a long time for me. I understood obviously that it was a poor prognosis. I also remember how drugged up I was. I was so heavily medicated that a lot of it was just a dream or a blur, kind of that different state of consciousness. And afterwards, it just seemed like, in a way, it was almost relieving hearing that too, because it was like I knew that they wouldn't be able to cure the disease. So there was really only one way I'm going, obviously, with all of this. So I guess in a sense that there is, it sounds odd, but a sense of relief because you think, not that you don't have to fight as hard, but I know where I'm gonna end up basically. So you just kind of put it on autopilot, I think, and just go, and just try to get by. And eventually, you kind of learn to put that stuff away and some of those harder feelings, because if you sit on those, and I think if you're stuck on those all day every day, it's so much negativity, and it's really hard to move forward and try to enjoy, the little things and enjoy life. So it's not that I'm in denial of where I'm at with the disease. I fully understand, obviously, the path that I'm on, but I try not to think about the cancer all the time and every day because I don't see a point to it. But then it does make, obviously, a situation, it's very raw, you feel very vulnerable at times. Obviously, this in itself and this podcast, there's a lot of emotion that's going to be involved with this. And it's because if you think about it, it's the heaviest topic. We're talking about end of life. And now we'll be moving into the discussion of death with dignity and aid in dying. And as mentioned, that's an option for terminally ill patients in California. And it's quite a process to kind of get to that point, but basically death with dignity is essentially assisted suicide, and as mentioned, patients who are terminally ill have the option if they wish to pursue this route. And how it looks, basically, for me, how this option came to light. So I finished the treatments, and after the relapse, we did more chemo. This was February of 19. We'd started the chemo in April of 19, and I've just basically been on different treatments since that time. Right now it is June of 2021. Initially, we were doing chemo, and that was pretty heavy on the body. It was harder. I started having a lot more complications from it. And there were a couple times in 19, I think both of you guys could probably agree, where I probably had one foot in the grave. I was pretty sick at one point. I think I dropped down like 112 pounds, lost a lot of weight, and was able to bounce back from that. Part of that, I think, was because we did switch the drug treatment plan to immunotherapy, and that's been a lot easier to manage. I think been a good drug to have, and has definitely been less tough with the side effects and easier to manage for sure. Do you guys remember any of that stint? There were a couple stints in 19 where it seemed like I was in and out of the hospital a couple times.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of those times your parents were even visiting. I think your whole family might have been here. And yeah, it's weird to think about that time for sure, but I just remember like you guys going through that, and Like, I think a lot of this is like a question of like time, like when. I'm sure like Susie, you've been asked that many times, even when you was a child, or like what the prognosis is. Like, that's what we think of. And I think the way you put it, that yeah, you were just very, like a skinny at the time. And it seems like chemotherapy has side effects that are, just as an outside like observer, that are way different. And there's like cancer, and then there's chemotherapy, which is a part of that. That seemed to be very intense, even from the outside.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. They are kind of those two separate entities. Let's see. So, as mentioned, just in and out of treatments, and a lot of this led to the aid and dying discussion I had with my doctor, which was back in December of 2020. Throughout the whole pandemic and that experience, I was doing treatments. I was able to work online again, which was nice. A really nice kind of silver lining for me with the pandemic. Being able to work from home and teach my kids was a lot of fun and helpful. But in 2020, it was December, I'd gotten sick, complications from an infection. I ended up at UCSD, and I thought it was pretty business as usual. I'd be in and out in a few days. They'd, fix me up type thing. And it was a Thursday night. I was hanging out in there, and my oncologist, Dr. Miller, came in. He's a really cool dude. And he sat with me for probably over 3 hours. We talked about the prognosis. We talked about the treatments that we've done. And this is also when he presented the aid in dying option. This is something I'd heard of, never considered up until this point. Probably figured that it was legal in California because we're so hippy dippy out here. But wasn't sure. Again, didn't really know much about it. He took a lot of time to talk with me and talk about what that looked like. And as he explained it, which we'll have him on later for another episode, he just went over the details of, again, what it looked like, which entailed multiple confirmations from different doctors affirming that, yes, this patient is terminally ill, and yes, it's likely as well that they'll pass from the disease within 6 months is another factor they consider. There's also a waiting period in between these discussions, and it is all obviously very heavily documented. There's only one pharmacy in San Diego County, I believe, that is able to prescribe this medication. And it's essentially just a cocktail of opiates and some other drugs that you mix together in their powder form. You mix them together in a liquid and you drink the liquid. And within probably 20 minutes, you're falling asleep. And eventually your heart rate slows and stops and you pass away. And that's the death with dignity process. You are able to call this pharmacy at any time, and they will deliver the medication under lock and key. Literally, there is a lockbox involved and all that stuff. It's very, for obvious reasons, very well monitored. However, the individual doesn't have to take the medication if they call for it. They are able to obviously change their mind and not follow through, and that's something we'll investigate as we learn more about this topic, is how many patients do follow through with it and how many end up using this medication. For me, I look at this as another option or another, I guess, choice, or really I refer to it as a medication, because we know that this disease will just continue to get worse. My body will continue to break down and be dismantled by the cancer. And it is a very unpleasant process and very painful. And as mentioned, there's only one outcome. So for me, when I think about this, why go through all that suffering and pain when in the end, I know it's leading to death? So, as mentioned, I look at this as another option for something. It almost gives you as well a sense of control in a way over the disease. And I also I see a lot of people who are really sick. And I'm sure you people have experienced it too, but there are some people who we keep around and there's no quality of life. And sometimes you look at these people and wonder, what's the point? And I don't want to end up like that. Obviously, I hope I don't have to use the aid in dying medication. Ideally, you just kick off in your sleep one night after smoking a fat blunt. But that was my experience with Dr. Miller telling me a little bit about the process and the drug. And I did it in that meeting. We both agreed that that would count as our first discussion for the process, because you need to have 3 documented verbal meetings with an oncologist or a medical professional who is able to prescribe this drug. And again, we agreed to count that as our first, and now we needed to wait 15 days in between to have our next discussion. And obviously, this is a very taboo subject, people. We're talking about assisted suicide. This is something that not a lot of people discuss. I don't think a lot of people really know about it in terms of options for patients who are terminally ill. So it is heavy. It's very taboo. It's heavy. It's life and death. It's the ultimate question we have as people, is what happens to us when we die. And obviously, when we're having these discussions, it's going to provoke a lot of emotions and feelings, and it'll be hard, but it's important to investigate this thing. And I think especially for the people who are sick and in this position, it's important to know that there are some of these options as well and explore those different aspects and elements to it. And Mom, I'm going to quit rambling for a second and send it over to you and ask, had you heard of this option before? And if not, tell me about how you learned about it, which I'm guessing maybe it was from myself or Dr. Miller, and just what that experience is like and what your view is on it, especially and when you get to the point, obviously your role again is as a mother figure here.
I was familiar with the option from the state of Oregon, and I knew briefly just by reading, and this was long ago, many probably before I even had children, about the option available. And I certainly am supportive of this. I recently watched my mother pass away from Alzheimer's. And when you talk about quality of life, there was virtually no quality of life there. And had this option been available to her in Illinois, I think she probably would have chosen something similar, because she wouldn't have wanted to live like that. So that is about the extent of my knowledge, although since you've become aware of that, you've enlightened me. I've done some research on my own and recognize that unfortunately this is not available as an option in Illinois, which means that Drew could not come home for his final days, because this would not be available to him there. So it's something that I think bringing awareness to this is very important, so people know their options and knew what is available. And actually, myself, I would like to get involved in making this more prevalent and more of an option to people in different states.
Hopefully that's something that will develop from this moving forward.
And
Who
that
knows?
is one of my goals.
It's ambitious. I dig it. I think that'd be powerful for you to pursue something like that, maybe even healing in a sense, if this is how I end up passing away.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, too, moving forward is something I wonder what your thoughts are about life moving forward, and if this is a process that I do end up following through with. I believe, obviously, there's a big difference between moving on and moving forward. So I like to think of it as moving forward from an event. How will you do that? And what do you see moving forward? What do you see down the line?
Well, again, down the
Or have you
line,
envisioned that?
I have envisioned that. I have replayed over and over again. It's almost like my life is divided into two distinct parts: before Andrew's cancer and after. And I certainly have played in my head, many different options. Should you choose to go, or should you pass away in your sleep, is certainly one of them. Or should you choose the death with dignity path? Would you want the family there to witness that and to be part of that experience? I've played that in my head. Or is that something you would prefer to do on your own? And certainly I would support any of your decisions. I think that's totally on you. Moving forward will be very hard, but I think I look at it as, if you choose to go with the death with dignity option, that is your choice. And I will support that. I don't think you would do that until it was absolutely, you felt that you couldn't deal with it anymore, because you've dealt with so much and I've watched you overcome so much. I know that it would be definitely the last resort.
Yes. It's hard to, I don't often, I guess, envision that experience, but certainly I think I'd want you guys out here if this is the path that I have to go down. It is very odd to think about it, because it's essentially taking your own life in front of your family, which is very, very, very different than how people typically pass away. And even a typical suicide, it is very different from that. So it's hard to envision what that will be like. But I know that I would like to have you guys there for it. Sometimes I do wonder if I do flirt with the idea of being alone and just doing it alone, and keeping that record confidential, and not not sharing with the family that, yes, I used the medication. Basically trying to spin it as he passed in his sleep. I guess how I look at that is, I don't think you guys would really know or find out, especially if with the patient-doctor confidentiality. So my thought is, maybe it would be easier, the healing part of that. and moving forward from that. And I'm not afraid to go either. I'm at the point where I'm satisfied with the things that I've done and the experiences I've had. And I've been putting up a grind for a while, so it gets tiring. It gets old. And it doesn't mean I'm going to throw in the towel, because I think whether I want to or not, subconsciously, I don't think my body will ever really just give. I think it's just going to keep fighting, and to the point where it's obnoxious, and I will likely have to use the medication. And that's probably because I can be pretty stubborn at times. But I think, as mentioned, the body just won't give up. There's been, as mentioned, a few times where I feel like I've had one foot in the grave and managed to bounce back. And I look back at that now and think, I don't know how I did bounce back. But to know that this option is there is somewhat empowering, or at least gives you somewhat more of a feeling of control over the disease. And as mentioned, I look back at the people that I've seen who have been in really poor physical states, and I just don't think people should have to go through that. I look at the compassion we show our animals, for example, and as silly as that sounds, I think a lot about my dog Dora, and she ended up getting cancer as well, and I had to put her down, and that was the greatest gift I could have given her, because if I didn't do that, she would have just continued to suffer with horrible seizures, confusion, delirium, all of it. And I don't think, if we show that compassion to our animals, I feel we should be able to show it to people as well. So I hope that's something we can do. And obviously it is an option for people like me in this situation in California. So hopefully with this podcast and these discussions, we can open that option up to other people as well. Do you guys got anything else? I'm trying to think of other topics.
It's been a really good discussion. I kind of got lost in it myself.
Yeah, I feel like now I'm just kind of, if I keep going, I'm just going to repeat myself in a way.
No, I mean the biggest decision with the aid in dying, and something that I think anyone who understands like how it all works probably asks themselves is like actually setting a time, a date. That in itself is very strange. Like let's say you all even agree that it's cool for like you guys all to be around, or your family to be around, or whoever to be like around, organizing that and scheduling that like a normal event, like we're going to the Cup, or that's just a very strange idea.
Yes, and I'm glad he kind of brought that up too. One of the questions I had asked Dr. Miller was from his experience, what his other patients and their experiences were like for this. And he said, one of the things he did say was almost all of his patients who have used this medication did have their family with them. And some would schedule it like they're scheduling a party. They would be in various states in terms of their physical health. But that's something I wonder too, is sometimes I flirt with the idea of like going out on top. I feel really good right now, and physically, yes, my baseline is very different. I am in pretty much chronic pain, but it's manageable. And moving forward, I know things will just continue to break down and get worse. So it is tempting to make that date and schedule that time.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that people don't. I never understood about cancer. Is like when you say you're doing well, it's a very relative concept. And when people ask, is someone doing well, it's a very relative question. Compared to that 2019 time you're talking about, you're doing a lot better. But compared to like what everyone goes through and how they live on like a normal daily basis, and you live like that too for for your whole life? I mean, the answer is no.
Yeah, absolutely. And we, as a society, people are courteous. You ask how you're doing. Oh, good. Everyone gives the same response. I'm doing good. And how are you? Oh, good. Oh, have a nice day. And it's like, if you ever, whether it's me or you or whoever, we all have problems. If you ever actually were to give an honest answer to that, what would that look like?
You want to save them the burden.
Right? Yeah, we all have baggage and these traumas and trials. But Mom mentioned earlier that the universe, this is unfolding as it should. This is where we're supposed to be. And despite these situations, I do believe that. I don't know why this is happening. I don't want to be sick. I wish I wasn't, but this is the position that we're all in. So you don't have a choice. You just have to move forward. You have to push on. And as mentioned, knowing that there is that option is somewhat comforting, I think, for sure.
When you guys were talking like earlier about like what Suzy had to go through when you were a kid compared to like what you have to go through now, the control factor, and also like I was thinking about your family, like you were like one unit, in one house. Now you're all over the U.S. So even like simple things like Suzy had to fly here to hang out. Obviously, just getting older and time passing, everyone goes into their own, like, I don't know, branch of the tree.
Yeah, absolutely. Megan and I have the tree tattoos. We got those when I was 21, and part of that tat and the meaning is that as we go through life, we grow and change and move in different directions, like the branches on a tree. And that's just the circle of life, right? That's how it goes. I mean, I look at my sisters who are having children, and you have obviously a sister, you now have a niece, so this whole cycle is starting to repeat whereas one time, we were the kids and Mom, you were making the choices. Now you're observing and supporting kind of from the sidelines as I make some of these choices as an adult. So it is very odd. The whole experience is very, very odd. You never think you're going to end up in this position.
If I had a question for you, Suzy, it would kind of be like one thing that is pretty impressive, I think, is, and I think, it probably led to some positive outcomes as well, is that you were able to spend your time in San Diego living instead of just, like living towards the end, is living life, and you still continue to do that. Suzy, some parents might take like a different route and be like, no, you have to live close to me now, or try to be more, I guess, authoritative. But I feel like you really work with Andrew to let him be an adult now that he's not a child like in the old days. And I guess what was your thought process like? And you and Steve both have, I think, done a unique job at letting your son be an adult.
Well, and that's something that I struggle with every day, because I would just move in here with you guys if I could. But it's a conscious effort that I make every day to support, but try not to be supportive as I can, and try to allow Andrew to make his own decisions, because he is a grown man and it is his life. But it certainly has been a difficult road. Thankfully, we do have a family that is very supportive, and I try to support the girls as well. I myself have been going to therapy regularly since Drew has been diagnosed, and that has been a wonderful thing for me personally. I think it's very important. As a parent, you never expect to have one of your children die before you, and yet you know that your life has to go on, and I have to be there for my other children. And that's something that I keep in mind all the time as we proceed through this. So it has certainly been a difficult journey, and it doesn't seem like it will get much easier, but these honest and hard conversations are helpful. And I'm hoping that if there's another mom out there in a similar situation, that maybe my words can be of some solace to you to keep on going. One of the things that I do every day is I wake up and I try to start the day with gratitude, something I'm grateful for. And as difficult as this second diagnosis is, I thank the universe every day that Drew did not succumb to his first diagnosis as a child, and I've been able to raise this strong and independent, wonderful man and watch him grow.
Thanks, Mom. I, I think as well, finding the balance or navigating this experience with our family, because I have tried to keep everybody involved. And it's hard. It's hard to be able to it's hard to share some of this stuff. And it's just hard to know what to do. There's no blueprint. No one expects this to happen, and there's no one there to tell you, hey, do this or do that, and it's going to lead to this. It's the unknown. So it is very scary at times. But for me and how we've operated, at least I feel very comfortable with the process. I feel like our family, we've almost forced ourselves at times to have some of these discussions because they are very difficult, but it is extremely necessary. And maybe I can see how we would try to avoid those initially, maybe, or at least I would. And as things became more serious, I think you recognize that you have to have those conversations, because at the end of the day, I don't especially want to kick off and leave you guys wondering things, or wondering if I had any concerns or doubts or anything with the process. And for me, I appreciated all the help and support from the family, friends, school, coworkers, everybody. And I feel confident with how we've handled it as a unit. I feel proud of how we've stepped up, you and Dad specifically. The girls, I know everybody would be coming out whenever they could if that was an option. But I think that we've done it the right way, even though it's been tough with the distance piece. I think we're hanging in pretty good. How do you feel about this process, and do you have any regrets or questions or desires for moving forward with this, wanting me to be more open or whatever that may look like?
I would agree with your assessment there. I feel a certain sense of pride too. Pride for us having held it all together. For pulling closer as a family unit. I think that the conversations we've had, again, that open and honest conversation, while they are difficult, it has brought me to a point where I feel very confident that as difficult as this situation is, and I know it's never going to get any easier, it's going to get worse before it gets better, but we have had those conversations, and I feel like there has been nothing left unsaid. And that gives me a lot of peace of mind, because I have no regrets. I've said everything that I need to say to you. I have been in awe of how you've handled this situation. And I think your strength has helped the family deal with this as we have. But no, I feel a certain sense of calm almost that we've gotten a lot of discussions out. We've said what we need to say, and there's a certain sense of calm moving forward.
That's reassuring, obviously, to hear you say that, and I appreciate you being honest there. And as when you mentioned the sense of calm, I think I can feel that too. When I used to think of the dying process or the Aiden dying process, I would get there would always be some kind of physical reaction to the thought. Like I might think about it and the hair on the back of my neck would stand up, or I'd get a chill or a shiver, or I could feel like my heart increase, the heart rate increase. And now, when I think about it, I am cool as the other side of the pillow. And I think just seeing that I don't have now that automatic physical reaction to me is a sign that I feel more comfortable with the idea and more comfortable with the process. And that's really important. I feel like I am ready if it were need to happen, but I attribute a lot of that to you, Mom and Dad, and the girls in our family and my friends, because I can see that you people will be okay when I do go. And as we move forward, my biggest concern had always been what was going to happen with you guys when I pass. And that still is my biggest concern. But to see how everybody has risen up, see how strong everyone is, and continue to be there, I think it's reinforcing that even though there will be some dark days and it will be very difficult, that you guys will continue to persevere and live a happy life and honor me in that way.
Well, that is my goal. You've done such a good job of living through all this that it is my goal and a way to honor you, to keep going and somehow find a way to support others.
I think that we will look to, I guess, kind of wrap up this part of the discussion. I think we covered a lot of really good stuff, and Mom, you did awesome providing a lot of really important details. Thank you for that and for sharing and making yourself vulnerable to this situation. And that takes a lot of courage and strength, so thank you for doing that. Obviously, Osbon, thanks for putting this together and being a part of it as well. As we move forward with this pod, again, we'll hope to investigate the physical, social, emotional, and spiritual components to the Aiden dying process, or death with dignity. We will look to have some guest speakers on, oncologists, social workers, chaplains, maybe hospice workers as well, and continue to investigate and explore the pros and cons to this, to death with dignity. And thank you for listening.